Hello and welcome back to the channel, wonderful people. It's Peasant Cube time here at Jank Diver Gaming, and today we're looking at our Crimson Vow update for the Peasant environment. I'll spare you all the wet-in puns this time around, but I want to set up the same guidelines I did for the Unrestricted Cube update. Due to time constraints and real-world obligations, I'm going to start focusing main set update videos on only the new cards from the latest set, and I'll spare everyone the minutia details of every single card we're removing and swapping around for the update. We're going to be talking exclusively Crimson Vow here with a nod to other additions and cuts when necessary. It should make for a tighter update video about the cards you came here to see. Your feedback here would be tremendous. Please let me know if you enjoy the shorter videos, or if you prefer the longer card-by-card set review detailing every change to the cube. Either way, there's a link down below to our Discord channel where we have our best conversations with our awesome community members, so if you want to chime in with any feedback or suggestions, or you're just trying to get in on a Wednesday night peasant draft, come join us. You can subscribe to this channel for more update videos like this, and there will be a link to the Deep Dive podcast down below if you want to find our full Historic Cube set review for Crimson Vow. Alright, we haven't had a peasant video update in a while. Let's get to it, shall we? The Unrestricted Cube has a little bit of a Selesnya problem, which I outlined at the end of the previous update video, but when it comes to Peasant Cube, Selesnya knows exactly what it wants to do. No confusion here, Angelic Quartermaster is a fantastic top-end play for the +1/+1 counter deck, and I wouldn't be embarrassed to run this at the top of my Boros aggro deck either. Selesnya's had plenty of top-end plays in green, but now we've got a white 5-drop for the deck that also branches into Boros aggro and Azorius Flyers territory. That's a lot of coverage, and I expect nothing but good things from this angel. You don't really see good double strikers in high quantities at lower rarities, and Fencing Ace isn't exactly doing it for us, but Twin Blade Geist might just iterate on the formula enough to prove its worth. The front half picks up counters and equipment well, plays excellently in tandem with a few pump spells floating around the cube, and the back half gives all of the upside to the creature of your choice. It's worth noting that there's a lot more graveyard interaction in the Peasant Cube, so it's not inconceivable to ditch the Geist to a discard effect and just slap it on an evasive creature for a huge swing. If the front was anything to get excited about, we would have already been playing Fencing Ace, but there's a nice aggressive package here that all adds up to a card worth trying out. I was turned on to Radiant Grace by one of our Discord admin who really drove home exactly how much you get out of this 1-mana spell. The front is obviously not enough. We've played with cards like Sentinel's Eyes before, and they're fine at best. That being said, putting a Vigilance Aura on an attacker and giving it even a slight power boost is likely to demand an answer at some point, and once that creature dies, you get spotted the back half for free. Now, if we're being honest, an enchantment that forces all your opponent's creatures to come in tapped isn't always backbreaking, but that is a new effect for the historic card pool, and gives aggro decks a new tool to circumvent blockers. Neither half of this card would be remotely playable on its own, but both cards and both effects for just 1 mana intrigues me, and we'll see how it plays. Sincerest apologies, but I wasn't able to put out Peasant Cube updates for Midnight Hunt or Jumpstart Historic Horizons, so if you don't draft with us often, you may have missed some of the recent sweeping changes to the cube. One of those changes was trimming some of the all-in Orzhov life gain cards in favor of bolstering Orzhov Aristocrats. The 3 Life Matters package from M21 was removed, but enough life gain payoffs are still around to support it as a sub-theme of Orzhov rather than a main theme. This is all to say that Panicked Bystander has a place here as a bridge between Orzhov's 2 themes. It's harder to transform than it would have been 2 iterations ago, but it's a nice self-contained card that can gain a few points of life here and there, and turns into an annoying roadblock if you can gain 3 life in a single turn. It might be a 1 season only type of card, but with the right support, I can see this card being a real nuisance. I too had a real thirst for discovery until I walked into my parents' bedroom at an inopportune time when I was a young'un. Now the only discovery I thirst for is in our cubes, and it really scratches that itch, if you know what I mean. We chatted a little bit about this one in the Unrestricted update video, where we put it up against the classic Compulsive Research. We don't have that direct comparison in this setting, but that doesn't mean the card's any worse for it. It's going to dig deep here, occasionally set up your graveyard, and when it comes down to it, you'll have a basic to pitch more often than not. We've had thematic versions of this card in the pool already with Thirst for Meaning and Thirst for Knowledge, and even though we're not currently on any of those cards, we'd be promptly switching them out for this new version anyway. I like my thoughts like I like my Waffle House hash browns, covered, chunked, and scattered. Seems like we'll have to wait a bit longer for our covered thoughts and chunked thoughts Magic the Gathering cards, but hey, we got one of the three here. We stacked scattered thoughts up against Memory Deluge for Unrestricted Cube, which is kind of crazy when you think about the rarity difference, but it's a clear and concise winner for Peasant Cube. The 4 mana draw 2 with upside is an archetypal staple of our Peasant environment, and while we've had a bunch of these to choose from over the years, it seems they just keep getting better. You get to see all 4 cards at once to inform your decision, grab the best 2, and even get to ditch the rest to the graveyard for occasional incidental upside. That's a big upgrade to other scry and draw variants we've played with. I'd say this one's here for the long haul, but they keep pushing these draw spells at lower rarities, so who's to say it won't be outclassed 2 or 3 sets from now. Storm Chaser Drake's a pretty easy one to understand here. Azorius is a dedicated Flyers deck, and the deck thrives off of Curiosity effects. What better way to support that strategy than with a great tempo 2-drop that begs to be suited up with one of those effects? Casting a Curiosity Aura on the Drake and backing it up with protection spells like Fight as One or Dive Down sounds like a recipe to bury the opponent in cards, and its fail case is an above average evasive 2-drop. Nothing bad to say here, it's a perfect fit for the section. Some of our Discord members absolutely dumped on the idea of playing Lantern Bearer in the Unrestricted Cube, and while their criticisms are valid, it's still not as bad as they're making it out to be. I think we can all agree that it at least looks like it's more at home in the Peasant Cube, where flying is a heavily supported keyword and the +1/+1 buff on the tail end is actually a self-contained game plan. I mean, there's a reason we play Chainweb Arachneer and Crowl Harpooner in our cube. Flyers has tons of support throughout the sections, and more 1-drops helps bolster the explosive potential of these decks. Black's not getting much here. Hero's Downfall was a pretty big rarity downshift, but as funny as it is to think about, Poison the Cup is better in an environment where Planeswalkers don't carry entire games, and we still have to curb the power level of Black removal, so we don't want too many murders in the kitchen. Black does get Fellstinger though, and holy hell is this card good. 3/2 Death Touch that cashes in your worst creature for a Sign in Blood, that's Fellstinger. I'm almost worried that this card might prove backbreaking for green decks to keep up with, as cheap Death Touchers have traditionally stifled green's more expensive curve toppers. That may be the case, but it's just such a powerful fit for the environment that it's coming in, and we'll keep our stingers crossed that it behaves itself. Dreadfugue, or the poor man's Inquisition of Kozilek, as we're calling it, seems like 1 mana discard that we can get behind for Peasant. Technically, we should already have access to Inquisition for Peasant, which would be an excellent fit here, but Wizards went and slapped the gold rarity equivalent of a parental advisory sticker on it, so it's out of bounds for now. The thing is, Peasant Cube curves are often quite low, and decks curve out starting on turn 1 so often that Dreadfugue feels like a great disruptive tool here. Cleave is literal actual kicker here, which deletes the mana restriction of what you can snag from the opponent, so it's not as miserable of a top deck as something like Inquisition might be later in the game. For all we know, Dreadfugue may end up being the Peasant equivalent of Thoughtseize, and that's saying quite a bit. Red's got a strict upgrade to Magma Spray to start things out, not that Red exactly needs more Shock or Lightning Bolt variants in the card pool. Trust me, there's plenty of that to choose from already. Our cube in particular though has so many recursive strategies and powerful loops you can pull off that exile effects are in hot demand right now. We weren't even playing Magma Spray, but there was an argument for bringing it in already, and here we are with a Magma Spray that can dome walkers for 2. Not sure we'll see that very often, but hey, it's an upgrade to a classic nonetheless. Another card that's gracing both of our cubes, Reckless Impulse, is good enough for Unrestricted and probably more at home in Peasant, where we have a fully fleshed out Is It Spells deck. Sure, you'll still run it as card advantage tool in your non-Is It Red decks, but Is It loves picking up spells that cantrip into other spells. We made the comparison to Light Up the Stage in the last video, so I'll avoid rehashing that conversation and just leave it at this. There's room for both spells here, and I expect the new version to play out just as well as Light Up the Stage has. Now here's a card I'm stoked for. I've played with Alluring Suitor a bit in Crimson Vow Limited as of the making of this video, and it does not disappoint. It's not hard to transform, you get a big mana bump the turn it transforms, and if you don't have an efficient way to use that mana right away, it gives you an activated ability to push in a few more points of damage that turn. The fail case of a 3 mana 2/3 isn't impressive, so there's some downside if you want to call it that, but it's not too hard to imagine this card being a pivotal part of some of the most ridiculous curve outs you can achieve in a cube of this power level. Another powerful red aggressive creature, we've got Voltaic Visionary as an efficient turn 2 beater with a strange cantrip-like ability attached to it. You'll take a little damage for your efforts, and you're not smashing with your 4-3 until turn 4 at the earliest, but over the course of the game, you're getting that 4-3 and it's replacing itself, all for 2 mana and a few points of life. I envision this as a Boros card that you're equally happy to pick up for your Gruul Beatdown decks, as the 4th point of power helps trigger some of your 4-power payoffs like Garruk's Uprising and Nessian Hornbeetle. There's some trickiness to using the activated ability on the front half, and sometimes you'll straight up brick on the exiled card, but you have control over when to use it, and the reward is definitely there. I'm waiting for the day we get an awesome slam dunk 4-drop for our red decks, because we've still got some less than stellar filler in that section. Ballista Watcher is next in a long line of creatures that we're not excited about, but that we're using anyway to fill the void of playable 4-drops in red. I'm not super keen on the daybound nightbound mechanic in Cube, especially given that there are so few ways for it to really matter, but Ballista Watcher is a pinger that occasionally turns into a big pinger, and that's not nothing. It's an expensive pinger, but a pinger nonetheless, and the backside's a pretty burly beater if you ever get it there. This is one of the few werewolves I could see just passing the turn with to get it flipped, since it gives you a way to use your mana if you just ship the turn without doing anything. At the very least, it's another 4-power dude for red, which Gruul decks are always in the market for. Wrapping up red, we've got an experimental swap of Kessig Flame Breather for Electrostatic Field. At one point we tried out Firebrand Archer here, but we landed on wanting the 0-4 blocker with this type of ability over the 2-1 attacker. They all blurred together to some extent, but my inclination is that the 1-3 body on the Flame Breather might be a nice mix of the other two effects. It blocks fairly well compared to the wall, and even triggers off a wider variety of spells, but it's also capable of attacking for chip damage and proccing cards like Raid Bombardment, which was the appeal of Firebrand Archer. It's a compromise between the more defensive and the more aggressive option, which might make it a perfect fit for both styles of Izzet decks, and maybe even a spell-heavy Boros aggro deck. Green's not changing too much with this update, and if you saw our Unrestricted Cube update video, the first of 2 new additions here should look familiar. Reclusive Taxidermist is here as well, living his best mana dork life, but interestingly, the graveyard text is much more likely to come up in this environment than in our sister cube. There's more plausible graveyard interactions, self-mill, recursion, and so on and so forth, that I think you'll be seeing 4-4 Taxidermist fairly often here. The great thing is that you don't need it to grow bigger to justify its spot in your deck. It's still a mana dork at heart, and green decks love their mana dorks. If you're shopping around for a 2-mana accelerant, it'll get the job done, and if you happen to be playing a Golgari deck, it'll probably be at the top of your list. The other green inclusion is the next contender trying to vie for Sifterworm and Howling Giant seats atop the throne of green late-game threats. Brambleworm isn't as potent as either individual threat, but strikes a nice balance in terms of unifying Sifterworms and Howling Giant's stabilizing power. The life gain from Sifterworm is on full display here, but you lose out on the larger body and the card selection. You pick up Howling Giant's reach on a much better body, but you lose the extra wolves that help to lock up the board against a wider army of threats. You do get a bonus of gaining an extra 5 life from the graveyard, which is something neither of the others can claim. It'll take resolving Brambleworm a few times to see how it stacks up. My suspicion is that Sifterworm still remains king, but Brambleworm might be good enough as backup Sifterworm when it doesn't get opened or gets sniped by another green drafter. We've got some cool new gold cards to tinker around with, starting with Wandering Mind, one of the most obviously cubable creatures I've ever seen in my life. Izzet's role in the cube is a Spells Matter archetype, and while Wandering Mind doesn't explicitly shout out that archetype, it's clearly very good there. 6 cards deep and finding any non-creature non-land spell is approaching never miss territory, and the only extra price you're paying is the 2-color gold tax. Think Cloudkin Seer, but pushed as a gold card, and well, that's Wandering Mind. Not a highly thematic card, but an excellent bread and butter addition to the cube. I said it already, but I'm in full broken record mode at this point, so once more, Selesnya knows exactly who it is and what it wants to do. The name of the game is +1/+1 counters, and Sigardan Paladin is our newest tool for this strategy. It's strange that it doesn't inherently create counters on its own, but it was designed to work in tandem with training creatures in Crimson Vow Limited, synergy that's going to be lost on us for Cube. That means you have to put some work into creating your counters, which isn't exactly in short supply. Do the work, and you've got a 4/4 trampler with lifelink that can throw around those keywords to other creatures with counters on them. It's big and beefy, highly thematic, and seems like an incredible way to race the faster all-in aggro decks. Green-white is a fan favorite of many of our Peasant Cube drafters, so I expect we'll get a lot of mileage out of the Paladin. One interesting feature of the Peasant Cube is that you don't get a lot of premium mana sinks at this rarity. Child of the Pack feels like a well-statted creature that can pump out tokens with your extra mana, all in a color that cares about beefy creatures and often ends up with more mana than it knows what to do with. Again, like the Ballista Watcher we mentioned a few minutes ago, this is a werewolf you're more than happy to force a transform with by using your mana to make a wolf and simply passing the turn. The back half is an absolute monster and more along the lines of what Gruul decks want to be doing, so you're probably going to do what you can to get it flipped. 5 toughness on the front is huge too, and is part of the reason cards like Murmuring Mystic and Nyx's Fleece Ram are as successful as they are in this cube. It's a sweet creature with a threatening play pattern, and I'm happy to pick up an interesting on-theme Gruul card. The final gold creature we're pulling from the bunch is Markov Purifier. Going back to what we mentioned about Orzhov earlier, Purifier is a clear way to signal the existence of the black-white life gain subtheme. In all honesty, we had a spot freed up by removing Rite of Oblivion, which has felt oppressively good for this power level, and that meant we had the opportunity to test a new Orzhov card. Purifier reads like a pure life gain payoff, but bear in mind that Orzhov Aristocrats is also more than capable of triggering this from turn to turn, so it's a little less all-in on the sub-theme than it might initially seem. Finally, we'll wrap things up with the entire slow land cycle from Midnight Hunt and Crimson Vow. Somehow we overlooked the initial half cycle for Midnight Hunt, but we found room to add these and get the full 5th cycle of dual lands into the cube. We pulled a weaker card from each monocolored section and a few unnecessary artifacts and utility lands to make room, and the additional mana fixin' will see significantly more play than any of the cards we removed. Not to beat a dead horse or anything, but this cycle is truly great for cube, as these lands provide perfect untapped mana fixin' from turn 3 onward. The red-white land specifically looks like it might not fit the Boros aggro game plan, but even that one's downside is non-existent in any hand with 3 or more lands, and beyond turn 2 it's free, easy mana fixin'. I'd say at this point we're quite satisfied with the state of the mana fixin' in this cube, and the added cycle will just make more games of Magic happen. Alright, the wedding's over, and that means it's time to part ways, I suppose. Again, your feedback is super useful here. Whether you prefer this focused approach to these updates where we hone in on the newest bunch of cards, or the former approach where we go over every single change to the cube, please let me know so I can adjust accordingly. Also, feel free to chime in about the additions we've made, or any cards you think we may have overlooked. Remember to find links to our Discord and our podcast down below, and subscribe to this channel for more content like this. That's all we've got for Crimson Vow. Thanks for joining us, and you'll hear from us soon for the world of Neo Kamigawa. My name's Timothy with Jank Diver Gaming. I'll see you all next time.